So you're writing a story, could be a novel, could be a short story, could be a video game, could be a D&D campaign, whatever it is you're writing. You're making your way through it, and you start to have some self-doubt because what you're writing sounds just like things that you've read and things that you have seen in the past. You start feeling like, boy, my writing is really derivative, and all I'm doing is just writing the stories I'm familiar with in the past. And what do you do at that point? What do you do when you start thinking, I'm not creative, I'm not coming up with something that is original enough, my writing is just derivative, and I'm just rewriting the same stories that other people have written in the past. So today let's talk a little bit about writing fiction and derivative writing and having common points of departure. This is a big issue, and there's a lot to be said about it. But I have a few thoughts that I wanna share today. So first off, um, every story that we tell is informed and inspired by previous stories to a greater and lesser extent. And very infrequently are we cognizant and explicit with the stories that we are copying. Very infrequently do we know, I'm going to write a variant, I'm going to rewrite Don Quixote. I'm going to take Don Quixote and I'm going to um, recast it in a new situation with new characters. I read at one point that the book or the movie Oh Brother Where Art Thou, the Coen Brothers movie, was a rehash of the Odyssey. Sure, you can go back and map those on each other and find that they meet these sirens at this point and come across these villains at this point, and you kind of go, well, that's really interesting. That didn't jump out at me when I first experienced that piece of writing. Uh, but upon sort of overlaying them, I can see where that was. That might be one of the rare instances when it's very explicit and you go, let's take this story structure and all of these plot beats and then rewrite them in a new time and place with new characters. That is the rare exception. More often, are stories written where they are inspired by a zeitgeist and a common understanding of the overall work of fiction that has been experienced by the authors and the viewers of that era. And a good example of this is sort of Silver Age science fiction. So Golden Age science fiction is the sort of ray gun wielding UFOs landing and fighting Martians in real sort of space westerns. And post Golden Era in the Silver Era, which is the sort of Isaac Asimov type era, there's a lot of really fantastic ideas, and each novel and or movie or whatever piece of artwork in science fiction has one or more core ideas that revolutionizes or brings in something fresh or addresses something previously. Um, Larry Niven and Ringworld, and you go, what if there was this planet that instead of being a sphere was a ring that was sort of inside out? Well, what would that look like? How would the world be? How would life be on that? Um, what kind of conflicts would arise there? What would the stories look like if this were true? If you have a story that has faster than light travel or time travel or some type of new element where you go, what would it look like if you could look back in time? You can't travel in time, but you can invent a machine that you can see into the past, and then you know um, for certain what occurred then. Or you can see into the future and you know for certain what would occur then. That's the central conceit of this story, and now I want to fill in that world. That's how a lot of science fiction writing has been. That's how a huge chunk of it was. And I think of a lot of that writing largely as a dialogue between the author and the audience, and dialogues between authors as well. The authors that they almost have these stories as one level of understanding what's trying to be said, and underneath that is this sort of deeper philosophical layers where they say, if the Star Trek world were to exist and we were to be post scarcity, then it would be possible to live without conflict and humans would live in harmony. And then someone else might write another story that's functionally a rebuttal to that and say, there will never be post scarcity. Humans or whatever will always have conflicts because conflicts aren't always about scarcity, but about power and about whatever. And you can't have a post power scarcity society. And so there are these sort of dialogues that occur slowly over decades with these contributions that are the core tenets of these stories, which is fantastic. And really, if you write a story that contributes in that way, you are contributing to a huge and rich dialogue that has taken place over decades and involved tens of millions of people who have experienced it and had their own thoughts in it. And that's absolutely wonderful. And you have to contribute to that dialogue, you have to be talking the same language, so to speak, and talking on the same topics about the same things. So the next iteration in that dialogue, the rebuttal to any claim, can't be so unique and different that you wouldn't understand it as a rebuttal. That rebuttal has to be pretty close. It has to contribute to that sort of overall work. Detective fiction, I think, is similar. I think there's a lot of detective fiction where that genre, thrillers, I think, are similar, where that genre, horror novels are similar, where that genre is grown and expanded and talked about by the people who read it and the people who write it, and they are writing back and forth to each other. They're writing, this is a great way to make a detective story, but wouldn't it be a little bit better if the main character was able to figure out this piece, or was able to resolve this piece, or was able to do it without this extra crutch, or did it in this new context, or this new place, and expanding the boundaries of that genre. And within genre writing, is necessarily derivative because of that, because you are writing, you're writing to contribute to an overall larger body. It's sort of like portraiture painting. You're going to paint in a rectangle on canvas with oil paints, and it's going to be a picture of a person. Sounds pretty derivative when you say it like that, but that doesn't mean that the paintings that you make aren't going to be beautiful and worthwhile and appreciated by the people who view them and appreciated by the other artists who painted similar paintings. So derivative isn't necessarily a bad thing. Understanding your place in the genre and contributing to the genre is appreciated by the readership and appreciated by the other authors, to the extent that you're trying to contribute something meaningful. Obviously, don't plagiarize, and obviously don't just write the same. Don't write something for the sake of rewriting something unless you have something meaningful to contribute, which you all do. You all have an interesting way to take a story and turn it into something with your twist on it. In fact, taking old stories and rewriting them, seeing a Shakespeare story made into something different, or you take the bones of Don Quixote and you make it into something different, is a fantastically wonderful way to write stuff. Salman Rushdie's book Quichotte, which is a retelling of Don Quixote in modern America, is one of my favorite pieces of artwork ever. And it is unapologetically derivative and a straight-up copy of a very fantastic piece of work. But that fresh take on it is, in a sense, better than if it were just absolutely original on a blank slate canvas. Because not only am I reading this new, fresh idea, I am reading it as a juxtaposition and as an addition to the genre. I'm reading it as a juxtaposition to the original, so I can find all the ways that it's different and all of the in-jokes. And I'm also reading it as an expansion of that long tradition of writing in that genre, which is fantastic, and it is wonderful to write that way. So if you find yourself with self-doubt, feeling like all I'm doing is writing another sword and sorcery book where the races of elves are at war with the races of dwarves, great. That's what we like to read. We know what we're getting into. We hope it is a wonderful and meaningful contribution to the genre that has your unique and particular twist on a lot of common points of departure. Let me take that phrase and add a little bit more to it. So, common points of departure. What I mean by that, common points of departure are little tidbits that are structures or archetypal characters or social constructs or science fiction ideas that are known and used often enough that the ownership of them is sort of broad and social now. For example, if you're writing a science fiction book, the idea of a laser rifle, right? A phaser sort of laser rifle. You could track that back and find out who was the first person to think up a ray gun or a laser rifle or some type of energy weapon or whatever. But that's so ubiquitous now that when you write, if you don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details of how a rifle works, you can just sort of say a ray gun, laser rifle, whatever, and your audience will be like, yeah, got it. I know what we're talking about. We can move on because I'm ready for the important part where you're going to have something slightly different, where you're going to give your meaningful contribution. So spaceships and faster than light travel and all of these sort of common touchstones of the genre, if you're writing a fantasy book, you can just sort of relay, well, this species of forest elves, and the audience kind of goes, okay, got it. I know, I've seen enough stories that are like that have the same kind of idea. If you read the Witcher books or play the games, or watch the series, there's races of elves that are derivative, and it's one in a line of 100 stories that wrote after Tolkien, and you go, okay, well, it's the same kind of thing, but it's very easy as an audience to go, all right, got it. I'm kind of on pace with you. We're starting off, and I know where we're starting off from. We're not inventing the whole world from scratch. That's difficult to catch up with. So having these sort of common points of departure where you go, my story is this ship and we're setting sail, you can come along with that story. This is a thing that you'll know and understand and recognize. Authority figures in books, right? Your story might take place in a galaxy far, far away in a long time ago, and there might be the equivalent of like a police officer or an authority figure or a governmental agency, and you kind of only got to write that a guy in a uniform with a badge comes along and says, hey, you there, what are you doing? And the audience knows, like, okay, I got it. That represents this type of, in Star Wars, all the stormtroopers have the same uniforms, and they represent this sort of imperial structure. You don't really need to get into the nitty-gritty of developing that. You can just look at it, and the audience goes, got it. I know what those guys are. They're stormtroopers. They represent the grunt foot soldiers of this. They're the instruments of this imperialistic authority structure, social structure. And that saves a lot of time and words where the story can move forward with what is unique and relevant and the special contributions that story is making, and not have to dwell on developing the ideas of authoritarian, imperial, stormtrooper type archetype characters. You can just sort of put those in there, and your audience will understand, okay, this is a stock character that is kind of in place of, and I understand what this represents. And your audience, if you write this well, will also understand that isn't the real important part. That's not the meaningful contribution that is unique about your story. That's not the thing that you're trying to foreground as exemplary and your meaningful contribution to the genre. Not everything that you put into your story needs to be a meaningful contribution. 9 out of 10 things can be common to the genre. That makes it a genre piece. That's okay. And then what is special that you are contributing, that you are adding to your story, that's where you spend your time, and that's where you dwell and add your foregrounding and so on. Patrick Rothfuss's book, it's hard to pronounce, Name of the Wind, that series, Kingkiller series, has a unique type of magic, right? It has a unique type of magic where things are bound together. You can read it and find it. There's a lot in those stories that are common to the genre, and you understand, like, oh, these are villainous monsters and these are good guys, and we end up in this roadside tavern in a time period that's vaguely Middle Ages-ish, kind of sword and sorcery fantasy, like roadside, and you're like, okay, I get it. I know where we're at. I know where the story is taking place. I can imagine the interior of this place because it's a common structure. It's a common point of departure for the audience and the authors in that genre. And then the author of that particular story adds something very unique and cool that is their special contribution to that, which develops the genre and adds to it. So if you're feeling self-doubt, as all people who are creative and make things that weren't made before feel, if you are writing and you're feeling like imposter syndrome, or that you're a fraud because you're writing similar stories to what other people have written, that is okay. That is as expected. We all feel that. Every creative person at some point looks at their output, looks at their paintings, looks at their writing, and thinks, what's the point? I'm just writing the same thing that everyone else has written. People are going to see right through it. They're going to look at this and go, oh, he just read this other book. That's why he's cracking this joke, or that's why he's included this spaceship, or whatever. And you just have to trust that your unique creative input, that your special spin on that, the reason why you love these stories and you want to write your own, and the unique influences that you've read that have contributed to the ideas you have to put on the page, will shine through in a good story, and put it out there, and be proud of it, because contributing to a genre piece is okay. Writing a detective story where the detective at the end figures out who done it, that's okay. Yeah, Agatha Christie is better at it than we are. Yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle is better at it than we are, and they did it before us, but it still is okay to write a detective story where they solve the mystery at the end. Okay? So tell me about instances when you have felt self-doubt because of your writing being derivative, or tell me about some of your favorite instances when you can see through that top-line understanding of the story to the underlying dialogue, where one author is talking to another and saying, you had a good point there, but what if we do it this way? And that's an interesting idea, and let me add this other thing to it. What are some of the interesting dialogues you've seen between authors and readership, or authors and each other, in your favorite genres? Please add those to the comments. The more we develop this conversation, the better all of our writing will be. Thank you guys very much.